Chief Minister, one thing which seems to be bugging everybody, because I suppose nobody likes uncertainties, and that is Brexit.
Mm-hmm.
Now, where does this take it? The UK have now reached a divorce settlement, and I presume negotiations that are going to take place, many of them could have serious implications for the Isle of Man.
Well, first and foremost, Roger, they haven't necessarily reached a divorce settlement yet. They've agreed that roughly the ballpark figure may be A, B and C, but there is still an awful lot up in the air, and it's important that we get over there on a regular basis to ensure that the concerns of the Isle of Man are A, listened to, but B, that we know that we are informed as soon as possible on events as they start to unfold or where things are going to go. So it's still not 100% clear, and we've got to ensure that we're there to ensure that the island dodges icebergs and seizes opportunities. And I think people talk about Brexit, but I always think Brexit is part A. Part A is obviously there's the legislation we're going to have to repeal, the changes, the freedom of movement of people, goods, agriculture, fisheries, you name it. But after that, you're then, whatever deal the UK agree with the European Union, you're then going to go into WTO, World Trade Organization rules and regulations. And that's where we need to also be looking at to ensure that the Isle of Man has access to the various markets and can get in and discuss with the key negotiators what's going to be negotiated, and that's part B, and we're also working on that as well.
This is a good illustration of unexpected costs, isn't it? We're talking about an expensive process there.
It is. We have Treasury have given the Cabinet Office additional funds to cover the cost of going off Ireland and the meetings regarding Brexit, etc. But as I say, we have to ensure that we're well prepared, and at this moment in time, we're as well prepared as we can be.
Right. Now, we've got a first of our telephone calls seems to be coming in here, but we'll have a look at that in a minute. But let me go back before we leave the EU and the Brexit situation. You recently had a meeting with David Davis, the Secretary of State, who's in charge with Britain's withdrawal from the EU. And you said at the time that he assured you the Isle of Man will be well looked after. Did he quantify that, or did he put more meat on the bones for that?
Well, it was probably... Are you sure it was David Davis?
I think so.
I met David Liddington,
right,
the Secretary of State, who came over to the Isle of Man, and I've met him before. And obviously I've met the Under Secretary of State for DEXU, who has ensured that we will be looked after and our considerations will be taken. But as I say, it's a changing game still. There are so many interests. We've got to the the UK have got to the negotiations on the detail now with the European Union, but it's going to be fraught and frantic obviously for the rest of this year and into next year.
There's a cynic in me. I know it's 40 years ago, but I had the dubious privilege of dealing once or twice with the UK system, and it's interesting, very polite, very helpful, sounded as they were very helpful, but when it suddenly came that our interests diverged from theirs, we missed out. In other words, they're paid by their taxpayer to look after their interests. How can we be certain this won't happen this time?
Well, it's having a good relationship with the Secretary of State, Head of Justice Department, and David Liddington is the person who legally represents the Isle of Man. We obviously have Robin Walker, who's the Under Secretary of State, and we again have a good working relationship with them. But by going over, speaking to them regularly, putting over our concerns, then obviously we will be doing our utmost to ensure that it's not just the UK's concerns that are looked into, but also the Isle of Man. But it's whilst you've got to have good friendships, you've also got to be firm with the people that you're negotiating with. And at the end of the day, I think you can do it. There's obviously, you try it the nice way first of all before you start to wave the stick.
Your predecessor always used to argue when we asked him why he wasn't being a bit more aggressive. He used to say, well, the problem is might is right.
To an extent, yes, but you can win the argument, and if you work behind the scenes, you can sometimes get your way. And I'll give you an example, beneficial ownership. Everyone was trying to force the Isle of Man to have a public register, and I went away with the team, and we came back, and the Isle of Man has a beneficial ownership, but it's a private register. Right. So you can work behind the scenes and achieve a fair outcome for the Isle of Man.
Right. long as you get on and do it. That's the problem.
Yes, you must. You can't bury your head in the sand and hope the problem will go away. You've got to get over there, meet the key people, and promote the island.
Right, well, we have a caller on the line now, the first of the day, and it's Doug Sandell from Leeds, I should imagine. Good afternoon, Doug.
Good afternoon, Roger.
Good afternoon, Doug.
Good afternoon. Yes, my question's really about Brexit. I'm a Manxman living and working in England. I had the opportunity to vote in the referendum, and I'll also be able to lobby my MP with regard to the MPs voting on the final document. As far as I know, the Manx people themselves have had no opportunity to vote. So my question is, at the end of the process, will people living in the Isle of Man get full, precise, clear details of the implications of the agreement, and will they be able to take part in a democratic process and vote?
Right, well, first and foremost, Doug, the Isle of Man prepares reports on Brexit and where we're up to and the implications for the Isle of Man, which we publish. They're online, you can see them, and we'll be coming up with a new one within the next 4 or 5 weeks, I would hope. That's the answer to the detail. So yes, of course we will be giving the detail to the people of the Isle of Man. The answer to the second part is, will the people of the Isle of Man get a vote? The answer is no, because the Isle of Man was never a member of the European Union. Protocol 3 of the Treaty of Rome enabled us the freedom of movement of people, of agriculture, fishing goods, and by chance then we got manufacturing as well. But we were never a member. We put nothing into the European Union. We got nothing from them. And therefore, I give the analogy, if your friend is a member of a golf course and they invite you in for a game of golf, when that friend leaves that club, do you have any rights to dictate to that club how they go forward? So as I say, we won't be having a vote on the Isle of Man because it's something we were never a part of, and therefore we can't have a vote.
But there are implications in the treaty that actually refer to the Isle of Man, even though we're not a full member. You're obviously going to Parliament and meeting the people involved to actually address some of the or make an argument about some of the outcomes. So my argument is that surely, whatever is the implications for the Isle of Man, and there will be some, the Manx government will take a stand, but will they listen to the people of the Isle of Man who will have a say in terms of the implications? Because there will be implications for people living in the Isle of Man, even though we're not a full member.
Doug, you're absolutely correct that there will be implications for the people of the Isle of Man. I'm not disagreeing with you in any way, shape or form on that. But you mentioned we're not a full member. We're not even an associate member. We had no membership whatsoever. We have been over and lobbied the UK government on the freedom of movement of people. Obviously, that's key. We want to retain the common travel area with Northern Ireland, Scotland, England, Wales and Jersey, Guernsey, the Channel Islands. That's something that we've been assured will be maintained, and they've been taking our concerns over fisheries, agriculture, our manufacturing, and the ability to recruit the freedom of movement of people into the Isle of Man with the skill sets that we need. So we have been putting our concerns over to the EU, whether it be DEXU, the Justice Department, to ensure that we are looked after, and hopefully we can ensure that we come out no worse off.
Do you speak with the same voice as the Channel Islands?
If we do come worse off, or there are implications that are not in the island's favour, how is the island going to protect its interests? Well, especially if it hasn't got a mandate from the Manx people over particular items.
Well, I agree with your concerns, Doug, which is why I'm over regularly. Every other week I'm nearly in Westminster or Brussels trying to ensure that the island's views are listened to, and then I'm also meeting EU country representatives too to put our views over. But at the end of the day, we are affected by the Brexit, but we were never, as I say, I don't want to labour this point, but we weren't a member, we weren't even an associate member, so we cannot have a vote. Now, that upsets an awful lot of people, and I understand that, but I have to deal with the reality is that we, as the island nation, have no say in whether the UK came out or not, but we have to ensure that our interests...
We could have a say. I mean, the people in the Isle of Man surely could have a say as what action or what response the Manx government could take and what it would need to do to address any implications that are disadvantage to the Isle of Man.
Absolutely, and at this moment in time, we have senior civil servants going over from the various departments that are affected. Obviously, the majority of the meetings will be from DEFA, for example, but also from Department for Enterprise, to meet with the relevant civil servant contacts in Westminster, and obviously I'm meeting with all the relevant politicians to ensure that the Isle of Man's concerns are listened to and taken on board. And I've also had Mark Garnier, the Under Secretary of State, who's promised me that the Isle of Man people at the coalface will be able to have meetings with the UK negotiators when it comes to the agreement. So our voice will be heard.
But is there a contingency plan if the voice is ignored?
Well, obviously we'll have to. Yes, you always have to look at all options, whether it be Brexit or.
My point is that given the democratic nature of the Manx government, which was obviously very democratic even before the English government in terms of giving people the vote, and especially women. But my question is, how will you be informed by people living in the Isle of Man as to their attitude and response, favourably or not, to the implications that will affect the island? So some kind of internal referendum or lobbying for the Manx people to be able to express their view. That's all. I'm sure that you have the Manx people's interests, to good heart as the Chief Minister, but how will you be able to ascertain views, particularly those of parties like farmers and fisher people who will be directly influenced?
Well, obviously, as I mentioned earlier, Doug, we do reports that the people of the Isle of Man can view. I know when I gave evidence to the House of Lords had a copy of all our reports in front of them, asking me various questions. So the people of the Isle of Man will be informed about the impact of what's been agreed, because obviously we've still got a while to go before the final decisions are reached. But the people of the Isle of Man will be made aware of what's been proposed and what affects the Isle of Man.
Just to repeat it again to make sure we're quite clear, what Doug's asking is that before you sign up to anything, that the people in general of the Isle of Man can give their opinions on what they're being asked to do.
Yes, people will be able to discuss it with their MHKs, and we will be having a debate in Tynwald.
Will you do a consultation?
It's too early to say, because if it comes out that it's bad news for the Isle of Man, worst case scenario, then we will be going out to the public.
Okay. All right, Doug. Well, thank you for joining us today.
Okay, thanks, Raj.
Thank you very much, Doug.
I'll probably see you. I'm coming over for our good friend Roy Kenyak's funeral, so I might pop round and see you.
Indeed, I hope you do, and have a good New Year.
All right, thanks, Roger.
Bye-bye.
And thank you, Chief Minister.
Thank you very much, Doug.
Yeah, bye now.
Bye-bye.
There we are. That's Doug Sandel calling us from Leeds. Now, let's have a look at one or two of the texts and emails that are in. Steve DeHaven and Pauline, they say, rather than tinkering around the edges of the NHS financial problems by cutting services to the elderly and vulnerable in our community, why are we not addressing the problem full on, as many folk have already suggested on social media, by increasing income tax by a few pence for everyone and leave the elderly and most needy alone? A few pence on income tax would surely address the problem in a much more significant and compassionate manner. Thank you, and good luck with the selection of a new health minister.
Well, and thank them very much. I think the Isle of Man spends virtually a similar amount to the UK per capita on health and social care. It's obviously something that we review from all the time, because, as I say, it spends £263.5 million gross, £209.5 million net, and it's not just a problem for the Isle of Man. I'm sure if everyone's been watching the BBC or ITV, the ambulances waiting outside hospitals, because they're absolutely chocker. And I have to say, just by the way, that when I checked, we have not had any ambulances waiting to go into, that hasn't been happening on the Isle of Man. But it's, as we are living longer, which is a fantastic result for all of us and a credit to our health and social care department, that comes at a cost, and that cost is continuously growing all the time as the cost of medicines, etc., go up.
Well, what she's saying is, though, at the moment, it is true that at the moment one feels that somebody's snipping off around the edges of the pie and not actually dealing with the meat of the pie itself.
Well, we have to have a full and frank... We have had a review. It's all about having sustainable and affordable for the next generation. We're having less children.
But we're talking about services now.
Well, we are talking about services now, and on the whole, we are comparing, favourably. As I say, we don't... Whilst people are concerned about the health service. We are, some of the cuts that have been made have been to services that you would not get elsewhere.
I have to say that I think, and you would know this, people really don't want to know about comparison things when it comes down to their personal service. They want to know what's in it for them.
Yeah.
And they're more concerned about what's happening here in the Isle of Man, not statistics.
Well, we are having a debate on this month. The Treasury Minister is bringing up a proposal forward that we have a full review of the financing of health and social care going forward. So, that's us listening to see, and we will see what comes out of that debate.
Where is the legislation for the EU freedom of movement, please? Well, this Schengen Agreement and all this sort of thing, but I mean, as far as movement is concerned, there are no restrictions of movement in and out of the Isle of Man, are there?
No, if you have the right to reside or be in the UK, then you have the right to come to the Isle of Man. That's the current situation. Obviously, whatever the UK then agree with the EU going forward, we will have to analyse that. But we normally follow suit because we have a freedom of movement for Manx residents, people from the Isle of Man, to go into the UK.
I don't quite understand this. To take up on Mr. Quayle's analogy of Brexit is the friend of the golfer. Why is the non-member turning up at the clubhouse every week to voice an opinion the club's not interested in? And if the club has to be meetings, why are they not video conference? It must be costing the island a fortune. I think that's a rather roundabout way of saying, why do you keep going to London? Why don't you do it on a video?
Well, I think if you speak to people in the business community, you get results by face-to-face eyeball contact with people, phone calls, letters. I can assure listeners, getting up at 5 to be on the red eye, to be at the airport for 6, to have a full day of meetings with the team and then get back either first thing in the morning or late at night isn't something you want to do, but you've got to do it.
Personal contact
is absolutely key. You get far more out of people when you've met them and they've understood the situation. And bringing people over, we had the Lord Chancellor over fairly recently. He went round our manufacturing sector, our creamery, and saw that the Isle of Man wasn't all financial sector. It had a diversified economy.
Mind you, in his job, he should have known that in the first place, shouldn't he?
But it's good to show them, rather than telling them. When people see what you've got,
that is the bit that bothers me. How ignorant, in the proper sense, that UK MPs are about us.
I suppose we have to accept, Roger, that there's 84,000 of us, and whilst the Isle of Man is the centre of our world, off island, it's not the centre of the world.
It doesn't stop them standing up and saying things that are not right.
It does, but then we also have MPs that stand up and defend the Isle of Man too.
Now, could Howard explain to the normal working guy like me what his time in charge has done to help me out, as all I seem to see is rising bills, cuts to frontline services, and basically a poorer standard of living with no hope of it getting better sooner under his command. He and his administration, he thinks, this is Liam, is letting us down. Well, how would you respond to that?
Right, well, first and foremost, if he's got a family, he got an increase for in child benefit. As I mentioned earlier, he's got £2,000 increase in his tax allowance that he doesn't have to pay. We've agreed to write off some of the Manx Utilities debt, meaning that charges will be frozen for the next year, giving certainty to those who are concerned about rising prices. We've instigated a review on the cost of living and a review of Manx gas pricing. The list goes on where we are trying to help people. And not only that, the figures out show that the man on the street, lady on the street working has seen an increase in disposable income for the first time in a while.
Okay, well,
but obviously it's not perfect. We're trying to do our best, but I think there's 3,300 people this year not paying tax that would have to have paid tax last year.
Right, let's move on to our next caller now, and it's Ken. Good afternoon to you, Ken.
Afternoon, gentlemen. I just want to try perhaps correct something about when you said there's VAT on aircraft. And
not aircraft, the leasing, I think.
If it's public transport, it's complicated.
Private aircraft we're talking about.
If you wanted to hire Hamilton's jet to fly you from Heathrow to Aberdeen, it'd be zero rated. Possibly. But it is complicated, so it's not true to say that, we're losing VAT or things like that about it. And that's the problems when you don't have experts, perhaps on the radio, when you talk about subjects that are very complicated.
Leasing...
It's just like getting on a bus. There's
a difference between public transport and private planes, yes.
Well, yes, but it's a company. It's not Hamilton's jet. It's his company that is running it as a passenger transport business.
Yeah,
I suspect.
If I'm told, Ken, you're absolutely right. It is an incredibly complex situation. But I was told that if you're using it for business use, then it's zero rated. If you then used your plane to say fly over London and take in the scenery, then it's VATable. That's how complex the use of a plane is. And obviously, I don't declare or state that I'm a VAT expert in any way, shape, or form. It's highly complex. But having spoken to our experts are absolutely adamant at Customs and Excise. They've done everything to the letter of the law.
Well, I'm just reading from the UK rules. The notice on it's the UK notice. It talks about 10 passengers. You see, but the other thing I want to talk about is was the Scottish fishermen and King's Scholars, was that not talked about in the Irish Sea Council meeting? So it just didn't come out of the blue.
Yes, it has been discussed, and obviously the Scottish fishermen aren't happy. I think they make about £3 million out of the out of scallops, and they're not happy that they've got to come into the Isle of Man waters to declare their catch. And Minister Boot has agreed to have a week's putting it on hold for a week so that he can have a word with the Scottish minister to see, what is the best way forward. But I'm led to believe that Ireland and Wales were happy with DEFRA's proposals.
So why wasn't it sort of sorted out in one of these meetings, the Irish Sea meetings we have?
Well, I presume it has been discussed, but obviously I'm sure that Minister Boot would be more than happy to come on and give a fully...
But again, it's taking from the Scottish person that was on, it was as if that had come out of the blue.
Well, they're not going to be happy about it anyway, are they?
No.
Okay, Ken, well, thank you for joining us today. That was Ken. Now, we take a break. But just one more email before we do. If Howard Quayle's visits to Westminster, Whitehall and Brussels have been so effective, why is there absolutely no mention whatsoever of the Crown dependencies in the EU joint report issued at the end of stage 1 of the Brexit talks?
Well, that's I know the document, and I probably know the person who sent the email, but they're not going. There was no need to put the Crown dependencies in that report. We are happy that behind the scenes we're getting to meet the right people, and that our views and concerns are being listened to. And that's it's not just me going over on my own. There are numerous senior civil servants. There are numerous visits by ministers of departments that are affected. It didn't need to be in that report, so we're more than happy that so far we have been listened to and our concerns have been taken on board. But obviously we will keep on lobbying for the rest of the time, because obviously we've got till next year to ensure that the Isle of Man is looked after and our concerns are dealt with.
Right, time for a break. There we are. Welcome back to the final part of today's Mannin Line. And with me in the studio is the Chief Minister, Howard Quayle. Now, Howard, we have a whole string of texts and emails coming here now with all sorts of questions, so let's see if we can deal with some of them. Can we hope that the new minister will reinstate Meals on Wheels and stop penalising the elderly? Example, armchair exercises.
Right, well, I think if memory serves me correct, because we brought in the armchair exercises during my tenure, they've been replaced by a private provider doing it. But I'm no longer in that department, so I can't comment fully on that. But I thought someone else was taking up the armchair exercises, which was to help people remain, flexible in their joints, etc. I mean, the Meals on Wheels service, I get that it wasn't handled very well from a publicity point of view, but at the end of the day, it was brought in by this government in 2003 or 4 off the top of my head, when no one else did that service, and government have paid someone to deliver the meals on top of the delivery charge that they gave. Now you have at least 2 providers out there providing that service free of charge, built into the fee, which is the same as, if not cheaper in some circumstances, than government and
Was the food not prepared at the hospital?
Yes, it was. So there are 2 providers now offering that service. It was costing 150-something thousand, and I think the people doing it wanted more money to do it, but the number of people using their service was going downwards. When you have to make savings, if the people can get the service elsewhere, for the same cost, free delivery, etc.
Is that happening now?
Well, yeah, I mean, there are two providers. I brought this with me because I was concerned myself, and I've rung up Health and Social Care, and they've assured me that everyone has A, been written to, B, has also had a phone call to ensure that they are looked after. They've all had a leaflet telling them that Wiltshire Farm Foods or Jack Frost Isle of Man will provide them with a range of meals, and there's also a telephone number, 686179, option 1. If people have somehow slipped the net, then please do ring that number. I'll leave that leaflet with Manx Radio if anyone has a concern.
People can't eat leaflets, of course. Perhaps there should have been a joined up changeover, shouldn't there?
Well, there was. Everyone, I've been assured by social services social care, that everyone has been personally called on by phone, as well as
food.
So hopefully it will. I would be very surprised if the new minister reverses the decision. I don't think we explained it very well, but I think once you realise that the service numbers were falling, you can get it elsewhere, and it saves 150,
Follow
160.
the logic. What I'm saying is there's a gap in the middle where there's no food.
But Roger, that's to be fair. If and I trust what I've been told, everyone has been called to say there are other providers that you can use. These are their contacts, and help them set up. And 40% of all the people who receive this service also have someone from social care coming in and helping them.
Right. Now, talking about care, the countryside care scheme should be means tested, says our next correspondent.
I suppose that's one item that is being looked into in the UK. So we'll watch that one with interest. I think that was looking at company factory farms, I suppose, where they've got thousands and thousands of acres and they're getting millions and millions of pounds. I don't think, from the proposals I saw, our biggest farmer wouldn't be classified as requiring, as not being eligible under the UK proposals. So I don't think it would affect the Isle of Man.
Okay. Now, this is a publicity that's just popped in. Evolve Tree Care have a charity Christmas tree drop-off today at Close Lake Derby Road in Ramsey. All proceeds going to Ronald McDonald House for poorly children. For more information or directions, please call 654512. There we are, Christmas tree drop-off there. I've heard that there were over 500 submissions to the Education Bill consultation. Is it unpopular with the public? Does the proposed bill have a Comyn support? And if so, why, says Charlie?
Well, obviously we have gone out for consultation. The views of the public have been listened to. Minister Crugene and his team are working on a bill to take forward to the public, taking on view those concerns.
There is a fear with this bill that it takes away from the parents and grandparents a great deal of authority.
I suppose it's modernising legislation that's needed. There was an awful lot of concern, if memory serves me correct, from people who teach their children at home that the Big Brother was looking in at them, and I felt it was important that whilst I could accept their concerns, equally we have to ensure that we're not over the top on the inspections of how the child receives its education, but equally we have a right to ensure that child is receiving a quality of it, a good standard of education, is being well looked after. So,
okay, how about a government bond to buy the steam packet so that the local people can benefit and we all prosper, says Derek?
Well, Derek obviously read my 2011 manifesto, because that was one of my proposals at the time. Now, obviously, that was a personal viewpoint. I think it's common knowledge, obviously, that Tynwald rejected the Isle of Man Steam Packet's revised offer for a new link-span user agreement, and consequently the government is exploring all available options to see what's the best way forward for the people of the Isle of Man, and that's where we are currently.
As far as I can gather, though, it's a very different market here, isn't it? We found this with airlines, we found it with everything else. There's not a lot of people out there usually queuing up.
Well, it's a case of who owns the company behind the scenes, and we've had a series of venture capitalists who have bought the company and leveraged it with debt, and I've always felt that the people of the Isle of Man are servicing that debt with the fares. That's a personal viewpoint. Obviously, the Council of Ministers are looking at various options, and when we have our proposals, we'll be taking them to Tynwald.
Well, for I can remember of the steam package balance sheets, of course, that situation did exist, particularly with the Australians, but it's now on a downward path, as the ships are getting older too.
Yes, the amount of debt that the steam packet has is certainly reducing. But as I say, we're looking at it at the moment, and obviously whatever we feel the best option is, we will be taking that to Tynwald.
If it wasn't for what may have been regarded as sniping in Tynwald, we would never have had the Mount Murray inquiry and the significant revelations that resulted from it, says Roger.
Well, if I could just assure Roger, we are still being asked the questions, but what's happening now is that if a member stands up and asks the question or comes up with a comment about something, what's happening now is that we're not getting another 10 people standing up and giving exactly the same comment, feeling that they've got to be seen to be saying something. If they feel someone has put the viewpoint over, that's it. They're not playing the gallery, and that's what I'm trying to say. We are still getting well scrutinised, and it's embarrassed myself and some of my ministers, over the last 15-month period, and that's great. What's not happening is that people are point scoring or voting against a motion, even if they agree with it, just to get one over on the person moving the motion. That's what stopped, and I'm delighted that it has stopped.
Is it fair that the public sector workers take home final salary pensions when it's the constituents paying a good percentage, and some of these can't afford to eat or heat themselves? We're talking about £100 a week for some. Where's the fairness, please?
Right, well, again, we have reviewed public sector pensions. It was, again, as a backbencher, it was one of my topics that I wanted to work on. I think I got told off in 2012 budget for calling it a Ponzi scheme at the time. We've now worked with the government workers, and they are paying more and receiving less. So the problem is more now the legacy rather than going forward. The public sector pensions are going to be more sustainable going forward, but we have a position where, sadly, when the pensions were first set up in the mid to late 60s, up until 2008, I think, circa 2008, no one had put any money into, government hadn't put its contribution into the pot to set up a decent fund. And in the 60s, 70s, 80s, when the Isle of Man was really financially under the cosh, the income from the people paying into their pension pot didn't go into a pot, it went to pay the bills, and now we have to come up with a legacy solution, and that's being worked on as we speak.
But there still is a situation that even if you get it to balance out, you still, for the public service pensions, have a final salary scheme, and it's still going to cost the taxpayer quite a bit to support it.
It is going to be a considerable amount. The shortfall is, going forward, and that's what we're working on at the moment. So I'm not denying that. But we've had various experts look at the formula on final salaries, etc., to see, how the changes that we've made will affect it. And it doesn't affect it as much as maybe you think or I thought at the time.
Right. Now, did the Chief Minister agree with the delay in corporatisation of the Post Office and change of view from, has the view changed from the last administration?
I support Miss Edge's chairmanship at the Post Office. We have to concede that there has been a significant number of letters being posted on the Isle of Man, and therefore the income of the Post Office has fallen with the sales, and therefore they have to look at new ways of balancing the books, but trying to retain a post office service around the Isle of Man that we all want, and she's asked for a postponement whilst she gets on top of the situation. Miss Watterson, who's a deputy chair there, two good ladies in charge of, and I'm sure we'll wait to see what they've got.
There's always a danger when something like this happens, isn't there, that it sets up as a corporatisation, thinks itself as a private business now, and it actually goes out and directly competes, sometimes unfairly, with the very taxpayer who provided the money for them.
It is a balance. You don't want government to be competing unfairly with the private sector. But as I said, let's give Ms Edge and Miss Watterson time to come up with their proposals. So yes, I do support the suspension whilst they okay. And the rest of the board, I hasten to add, come up with some solutions.
Right. Now, we've just got 2 minutes to go. Not under 2 minutes, 1.5 minutes. So let's see. Who has Mr Quayle talked to about the Panama Committee in relationship to VAT and corporation tax? I think those the Panama Papers he probably means. Did that come into it at all?
Well, if it was the Panama Papers, I've spoken to our own officers to see if people on the Isle of Man were affected by it or responsible, and an awful lot of the Panama Papers were historic. And we had a very small percentage. When you look at various countries, the Isle of Man, I think, had less than Jersey and Guernsey as an example of people who were affected by the Panama Papers. But it was all historic. It was all, from what we can see, above board, but it has been looked into.
Now, probably this is the last question, but I wonder if you could ask Howard regarding the work permits. Will steps be taken to ensure that those with a criminal record, such as crooks and violent behaviour and sex offenders, etc., will not be permitted to reside or work in the Isle of Man? Also, at least 2 new MHKs are gloating and behave incredibly maturely about over the hospital problems. Surely then there shouldn't be any part of any department in their actions. I'm not too sure what that bit means, but so let's deal with the bit about people not getting work permits.
Yes, that's something I believe that the Lawrence Skelly, Minister for Department for Enterprise, will be looking into, to ensure that only people who have the right to be in the UK can come to the Isle of Man to work. That
still doesn't stop people with a dubious record coming here, though, does it?
Well, we can't stop them at this moment in time if they have the right to be in the UK. But it will be, the last thing we want is to be swamped by people who have a criminal record. But it will be looked into.
OK, well, there we're right at the end of the programme now. Howard Quayle, the Chief Minister, has been our guest. Thank you for joining us, Howard. On the switch is Catherine Nichol, and I'm Roger Watterson. And Catherine and I will be back next week. Until then, goodbye.